Kalalau Malak Yahweh, Wa Yahushai Ba Hashem, Rahakudash. Double honors to the elders of GMS Ruel. Blessings unto those men. And blessings and salutations to the Akim out there in truth, pushing his word in all sincerity. With that being said, Shalom Israel, Barakatah. Today's lesson, the role of the Russians. And when it comes to the scriptures, Russia is known as Gog and Magog, according to the scripture of Ezekiel 38 and verse 2. And they are also known as the Medes, according to the scriptures, the modern day Medes. The Lord, Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai in these last days will utilize the Russians to bring about that inevitable war with Babylon the Great, which is America. And what's currently happening with the Wagner Group mutiny in Russia will have no effect on Russia itself, because they have to play a major role in the destruction of modern day Babylon the Great. This is all prophecy. The Wagner Group, also known as the Wagner Private Military Company, is a Russian state-funded paramilitary organization. It is a private military company, the PMC, comprised of mercenaries for hire, that has been described as a de facto private army of Russian President Vladimir Putin's former close ally, Yevgeny Prigozhin. So, the modern day Medes are being stirred up to the point of no return from all different angles. And they will come up against the West in an all-out inevitable war, because they have a major role to play in the fulfillment of Isaiah 13 and 17. So Russia is not going anywhere until they fulfill prophecy. Even if Vladimir Putin was to be overthrown and someone else comes into power, prophecy will still play out. What you do not seem to understand is that when it comes to the prophecy of the Lord, this word does not go back unto him void. The word of the Lord is too powerful. And one thing is for certain: what shall not fail are these prophecies. The word of the Lord does not go back unto him void, but it does fulfill itself. Everything has its season. But the modern day Medes will come up against the West in an all-out inevitable war against Babylon the Great, which is America. And no one can stop it. Isaiah 13 and 17. Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it. The Russians are those modern day Medes that shall be stirred up to come up against Babylon the Great, aka America, in that greater war to come. This is the role of Russia according to prophecy. In other words, right now what you're seeing in Ukraine, that's a war of brother versus brother, a brotherly war. Edom versus Edom. So-called white race against the so-called white race. But the other nations will also take part in the battle of Armageddon, in that inevitable World War III. There is no stopping it. But first cometh the CHIP of Revelation 13 and 16. That comes first, and then the war comes after that, quickly. But with that being said, let's go over to Jeremiah 51 and 11, another scripture of the Medes. Here is another scripture of the Medes, which are the Russians. Jeremiah 51 and verse 11. Make bright the arrows, gather the shields. The Lord hath raised up the spirit of the kings of the Medes, for his device is against Babylon to destroy it, because it is the vengeance of the Lord, Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushai, the vengeance of his temple. The arrows represent the missiles. A good example of that was given in the movie Broken Arrow with John Travolta and Christian Slater. That's why they called it Broken Arrow. Because in the movie they had stolen a nuclear weapon. Excellent movie. The kings of the Medes are the Russians. It's all a matter of time when the Russians revert back to that old Soviet Union mentality of warfare. And that is the role of the Russians. They shall go back to that old Soviet Union mentality of warfare to come up against the West. To come up against the Americans and their allies. But the role of the Russians will play out. For his device is against Babylon. Refers to those nuclear warheads that will be launched from the perspective silos of the land, sea, and air. And there are silos upon the lands and even upon trains. There are silos out at sea in the ships and submarines. There are even silos on the airplanes when they open up and send that missile out. The arrows will come from all different directions, land, sea, and air. You also have those tungsten arrows up in space in those satellites with that kinetic energy. One hit from those will cause major damage. Those tungsten rods, I think they're called. But the time approaches when the Lord, Yahweh, Yahushai, shall release the angels in the four corners of the earth to bring about that fiery destruction of the missiles and of the chariots of fire. The chariots of fire themselves will shoot concentrated laser beams upon the people and the infrastructure. Just like you saw in War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise. And the scripture of 2nd Ezra 6 and 9 does say, for Esau is the end of the world, and Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth. So you know great devastation cometh. Esau, Edom represents the wicked, and Jacob represents the righteous nation, coming to power in that new heaven and new earth under the rulership and leadership of the Lord, Yahweh Yahushai. And Israel has always been you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Tainos, and Native American Indians. You are the 12 tribes of Israel. But as far as the former rulership, it shall not be remembered or even come to mind, as the scriptures do say. Let's go over to Jeremiah 51 and 28, because that also talks about the Russians. Jeremiah 51 and verse 28. Prepare against her the nations with the kings of the Medes, the captains thereof, and all the rulers thereof, and all the land of his dominion. And according to the scripture of Jeremiah 50 and verse 9, the Lord, Yahweh, Yahushai, will cause to come up against Babylon an assembly of great nations from the north country. Russia itself is in the far upper corner. It's in the far upper north country. On that day, the nations and the stirred up kings of the Medes, which are the Russians, its captains and rulers thereof, shall come up against Babylon the Great, which is America. And I can't stress that enough, because that is biblical prophecy. That will take place. That's why Russia's not using their best weapons. They're using their old stock. They will not regard silver or gold, and their only purpose shall be to burn her with fire. That is the role of the Russians. And this is all prophecy, an inevitable prophecy. The word of the Lord does not go back void. It gets fulfilled. Prepare against her the nations with the kings of the Medes, the captains thereof, and all the rulers thereof, and all the land of his dominion. And for all those who do not believe in prophecy, you shall see it with your very own eyes. The West, Ukraine, and even the surrounding countries are stirring up the juggernaut forces of the modern day Medes. And you are seeing this now. All this is biblical prophecy. That's why it's important for Israelites to get right and come back to the Lord, Yahweh Wah Yahushai. Jeremiah 51 verse 29. And the land shall tremble and sorrow for every purpose of the Lord, Yahweh Bahashem, Yahushai, shall be performed against Babylon, to make the land of Babylon a desolation without an inhabitant. A desolation. The only thing that will live there after the smoke clears are wild birds. But Russia will strengthen their ties with the other nations, and they will come up against Babylon the Great, which is America. The chess pieces are being set on the board as we speak. The only thing that is left for modern day Babylon to do is to implement the MOTB-CHIP of Revelation 13 and 16. Once that is done, all hell breaks loose. And Esau, Edom goes into slavery as soon as that smoke clears. But it's just as the scriptures have said. Babylon shall become a desolation without an inhabitant. The worst world war to come is on the horizon, and while the United States has remained the top world superpower, now you are seeing threats from China, Russia, and other smaller countries. The U.S. will have its hands full as time progresses. They have their hands full now. The more dirt that they do and the more sabotage that they do, the worse it gets. Because it's all prophecy. Right now, Esau Edom is fighting against Esau Edom by the sword of his own brother, according to the scripture of Haggai 2 and 22. But the time approaches when all nations will take part in World War III, the worst war of all. And you shall lose that one as well. Just the same way you lost Vietnam. You cannot beat a force that digs tunnels. The judgment of the Lord, Yahweh Wah Yahushai, is flipping unto Esau, Edom, and the rest of the nations that were in league against the nation of Israel. That's why you are seeing the things you are seeing now around the world. But it will continue. And the Russians are going nowhere. They have a major role to play in biblical prophecy. But with that being said, Ka'olam Malak Yahweh, Wa Yahushai Ba'Hashem Rahakwadash, and double honors to the elders of GMS Ruel. Blessings unto those men, and blessings and salutations to the Akim out there in truth, pushing this word in all sincerity. With that being said, Shalom Israel Barakatah.